Welcome back, Wealthy Nation. I'm Adrian. This is Neoliberalism Explained that we're talking about. So, why doesn't anybody call themselves a neoliberal? People are pretty comfortable calling themselves capitalists. Capitalism versus socialism, we understand those labels. Why is nobody out there calling themselves a neoliberal? Well, really, nobody wants to be associated with the destruction of our social bonds, dehumanization of individuals, humanization of corporations, and sort of neoliberalism has a lot of negative baggage associated with it, and nobody wants to be personally associated with all of that negative stuff, because neoliberalism, frankly, sucks. It's pretty simple. So nobody wants to call themselves a neoliberal. It's kind of a pejorative term. That is said in much better vocabulary than I could say by myself through this researcher, Philip Mirowski. So we're going to do a little bit of a read-along and listen to how Philip describes it. Quick backstory. It's important to know the ideology of neoliberalism, sort of the basis of it. It came about out of this school of thought from a group called the Mont Pelerin Society. A group of guys met in Switzerland in 1947. They were upset at how much money they were paying in taxes because of the Marshall Plan to restore the global economy, because we got ourselves into a war. And so they had all of these principles of government deregulation, free marketism, decreasing taxes for the wealthy, allowing the wealthy individuals to finance the economy and sort of stimulate growth on their own. That was kind of the ideological basis. And again, it's not something that any founders are ashamed of. This is something. These were their economic ideas, and they promoted it their entire lives. So it's not a secretive society that they went and did in conspiracy. This is right out here in the open, and they were just guys who got together after World War II and said, wouldn't it be great if we paid a lot less taxes? What's it going to take to make that happen? So the founding members, and of course it's an oversimplification, but I always think it's important to empathize with that thought process, because now it's easy to criticize and it's easy to see all of the negatives that have sort of manifested out of this new culture of ours, where everything is privatized, and so there are no more public free spaces. You just have to pay to exist. But it's important to know where they come from. They're just people. They got together in a room in 1947 and talked this stuff out, and then since that original meeting and all of their annual conferences developing these ideas, it's spread across universities, businesses. They publish these ideas in journals, newspapers, and magazines, and so on. So the ideas are now far more disparate. They're all disconnected. They're all people that have taken this as true. They've accepted this ideological basis, and they've gone out on their own to further advance ideas of free marketism, pure competition, government deregulation is sort of the best system. So that's what has happened since then. It's been an organic process of essentially these guys put together some research and theory and started to publish it, and then it had a snowball effect from there. So it's not like, again, there's a puppet master up on top. It's just, this is the results of decades of people going about doing their own thing. So the founders of the Mont Pelerin Society include Friedrich Hayek, Frank Knight, Karl Popper, Ludwig von Mises, George Stigler, and Milton Friedman. And you can Google their website. They're just out there on the internet. And in their statement of aims, they talk about where their ideology came from, and it comes out of this worry that there's a force of oppression that they need to fight against. So it's one of those things where, I think that you're right in your fear of the thing, but you're wrong in your association between the thing and reality. What you're afraid of is imaginary, it's not actually there. So I don't know what they were seeing in 1947, I wasn't there, but when I read their statement of aims now, it almost seems like the thing that they were afraid of is the thing that their ideas ended up creating in the end. So I think it was an interesting self-fulfilling prophecy, whether or not they saw it coming. But neoliberalism, I had to pacify myself. I'm getting carried away. We want to talk about why nobody calls himself a neoliberal. So, pretty clear at this point, nobody wants to be associated with, you know, an enormous, you know, the enormous wealth inequality. Well, they don't mind that as long as it's framed as a positive thing. You know, wealth achieved through the spirit of competition. If you're poor, it's a consequence of your own inability to work hard enough. It has nothing to do with the fact that no matter how hard you work in a minimum wage job, you're not going to make a living. So in any case, the negatives of neoliberalism, I think, are clear. That's why nobody calls himself a neoliberal. And in the academic terms, let's take a look from the guy, Mr. Philip Mirowski, talking about neoliberalism here. The elusiveness of neoliberalism, however, ultimately stems from denials that neoliberals themselves have made about their efforts. While we can fairly well identify the roster of who should be acknowledged as part of the movement, at least from its beginning in the 1930s until the recent past, we are confronted with the fact that, in public, they themselves roundly deny the existence of any such well-defined thought collective, and stridently resist the label of neoliberalism. Not only do they wash their hands of most activities of what I call the neoliberal thought collective, this is Mirowski's words, as when Hayek and Friedman abjured the Pinochet interlude in Chile, but they complain that their opponents, the socialists, have always gotten the better of them, and thus they claim their political project has never enjoyed any real successes, ever, anywhere, contrary to all the evidence brought to the table. They are forever the bridesmaid of the conservative parties, but never the bride. Given the sheer numbers of people involved, the astronomical sums of money, and their cultural dominance of the airwaves, this sad sack victimhood is really quite remarkable and calls for serious examination. Perhaps it has something to do with the fact that a political movement that dare not speak its own name has intellectual contradictions that it dare not air openly. Whew, Phil. Cheers to that. So the takeaway is that ideologically neoliberalism is contradictory. It doesn't make sense to say that we're here for freedom, but not your freedom, the freedom of the market. Not your freedom to have whatever it is, affordable utilities. Sorry, Texans with a $17,000 energy bill. Wasn't in your Bill of Rights. Threw it to the private market. Privatization, baby. Welcome horns. So any right that wasn't explicitly given to us is left open to the private market. And the idea of freedom is given to the market too. Markets should be free. Markets have an inalienable right to be free. We don't have an inalienable right to free health care. That wasn't in the Bill of Rights, so not an inalienable right. No inalienable rights to electricity or internet or clean water. Gotta pay for those. And I know that a lot of that existed before neoliberalism, but neoliberalism is the extreme version of that. It's that free marketism, privatization, fierce competition, zero-sum competition everywhere. And sure, it makes sense in some places, but it definitely doesn't make sense as the categorical answer to all of our problems. So, that's why no one calls himself a neoliberal. Cheers, Wealthy Nation. See you next time.